So my name is Habib Battah. I'm an investigative journalist based in Beirut. I'm also the editor of the news site BeirutReport.com, and I have been working in Beirut as a journalist for the past 15 years. Well, no, I mean, journalism is really about dedication, determination to get answers to your questions and having the right contacts to know who to call, to find out what's going on, to get people's take for the story. So technology is a great tool, actually, that's been very helpful in my work and helpful to a lot of journalists these days, especially how we can now crowdsource information and get a lot of reports. But at the end of the day, you have to exercise news judgment. You have to kind of have some kind of social responsibility about what you're doing, accuracy. So you want to verify what you're hearing. So you obviously just can't use the technology to aggregate what's going on and then just throw it all online. No, you need to kind of double check and see if it really happened. And then also, qualify the information by your news judgment that tells you that, well, maybe I should check the source out. Is it credible? Maybe I should get another side of the story on this. Even if I don't believe that side of the story, then I should definitely still put it in. So those are the fundamentals of the way that journalism is practiced ideally. And I think that that's really important to bear upon before you start using the technology. Face-to-face interviewing is very good because you get to get a feel for the situation, the person's body language, the person's environment. So I think that traditionally we've always preferred face-to-face interviews over online interviews, over emailed interviews. Emailed statements are subject to review by public relations people, by people who want to influence the story, and so they're not really the kind of fresh. You want spontaneous answers. That's usually when you get your best material, where people are going to be more honest when they're spontaneous. They don't have a filter, somebody else to check their answers before putting them in. So face-to-face is always the preferred way of interviewing. Although increasingly, there is chatting, but again, you don't really know who is writing the answers if you're chatting with somebody. So definitely the face-to-face interview is the closest we can get to having an interaction with somebody that goes beyond, that gives us a lot of detail about them. I think citizen reporters are just average people who are equipped. We're all empowered today with the technology to do news reporting. We all have cameras, video cameras. I mean, for the most part, even in the poorest parts of the world, people have phones with cameras. They have access to basic applications that you can build an audience with. So I think some people obviously are more, more have bigger audiences than others, but still, I think we're equipped with these tools. So anybody can be a citizen reporter. Anybody who takes a snapshot of a news event or a problem in their society that needs to be fixed, whether it's a broken street light or a hole in the road or eyewitness to corruption. So, I mean, everybody can be a citizen reporter. I think when it comes to a major news organization, obviously it's going to be somebody who has an experience in the profession of journalism, which is, which there are principles to, about objectivity, about, sourcing and as well as, trying to separate opinion from an attempt at objectivity. There's no such thing as objectivity, but there are attempts. Strong attempts can be made toward objectivity, I think. And that's one big difference, I think, between the average citizen reporter and the average blogger and somebody who has a journalistic background is that even if you don't agree with somebody's opinion, you should try to seek that opinion and include that opinion and be inclusive. At least that's the goal. Obviously, a lot of mainstream news organizations might not even do as good of a job as bloggers sometimes. Sometimes we're finding out that bloggers are doing a better job and that there's more objectivity going on sometimes outside of the mainstream. But in general, there has been this tradition of journalism and these principles of trying to be objective, of trying to double check your sources. And obviously, the bigger the organization, the older organization, the more experience the people have in doing that. So I think journalism still is a profession. It's not the same as anybody taking their camera. But increasingly, a lot of newspapers and journalists have done a really bad job over the years, even from major places like the New York Times, who has had articles about Beirut, for example, that were that were just completely false headlines that were later changed actually because of citizen reporters. So a real advantage of citizen reporting, I think, is that and just the entire realm of citizen media today and social media is that you can't get away with falsehoods as easily as you could before, and people have a channel back. So I think that they're complementing each other now. I think citizen journalists and regular journalists can really complement each other by supplying extra details, places that the journalist couldn't go, and also telling a journalist when he's out of line. And there are a lot of instances where journalists have really needed to do a better job. I think what's great about citizen reporting is that people can often have access to places that journalists might not be, or journalists might not be allowed near. So especially in Beirut, for example, if I was going around with a big camera, a big DSLR camera, I probably would have been detained and stopped a lot more than I already have. So having the cell phone camera is really helpful in that sense, and so as a journalist, I'm sometimes adopting the technologies that citizen journalists can use, which is the phone camera, for example, is very helpful. Also, a lot of times things happen to citizens when they're not journalists. So citizens might face injustice. They might have a corporate representative speak disparagingly to them. The kind of things that people wouldn't treat journalists sometimes the way they treat average citizens. So in a lot of the cases, you want average people's reaction and interactions and eyes and ears when a lot of times corporations and governments try to treat journalists nicely, let's say, because they're afraid of so that's really important to see how average people are getting that. At the same time, though, I think a lot of institutions, government institutions, corporate institutions still kind of have this stigma against bloggers and people who are citizen journalists, and they don't invite them to press conferences, and they don't talk about their news to them. And I think that's a mistake. I think that we should see more and more events open to not just the press but average people too, because they should also be given a chance to recount the events that are happening in their own language and their own way of communicating with their audiences. So there's there's pluses and minuses of both, but I think combining them will be the step forward. I think the most important one of the most important traits is dedication and determination to get the material that at least the material you want to get. And that means going places at odd hours, waiting around, calling people repeatedly, getting a lot of no's, and I can't help you, and just proceeding to try to get information, doing the research, having a thirst and a curiosity, not being satisfied with a couple of sentences from somebody here or there, wanting to get more context, wanting to really understand a story as much as one can with the time given, using really all of your time to dedicating yourself, devoting yourself to a story. That's, I think, one of the keys to investigative reporting. Everything else, will come through the research. The research is essential, obviously, in any kind of journalism, because without good research, we don't have good questions. And not every question is a good question. As we're often told in grade school, when it comes to dealing with politicians and corporations, you need to ask specific questions. And the way you get those is through the research. So I would say a combination of the dedication, the research, pursuing sources constantly. Sometimes they say in this business, you make your own luck. And when you get lucky, it's because you've been out there all day and you've been talking to people all day, and then somehow something comes up, something pops up. And so you make your own luck, per se, is kind of an old saying that some journalists use. I think readers have a very important role going forward when it comes to their relationship with journalists. And we're seeing that today. Recently in Beirut, there was suicide attacks, and the international media didn't cover that story as much as they covered the suicide attacks in Paris. But because there was such an outcry from readers about the fact that this story was kind of being ignored, a lot of the mainstream media have come out and had news stories, updates, and kind of inward-looking stories, asking questions about their own coverage and the coverage of others. So I think that that's one instance where we can see that readers are having an impact because they're able to talk and respond to the kind of stereotypes that sometimes come across in the media, the inaccuracies, the dehumanizing portrayals of people, the Eurocentrism, the American-centric reporting that we see. So increasingly, I think readers, and not just readers all over the world, especially readers in places that are not covered, are able now to be part of the story and able to make their voice heard in a way that can't be ignored by the mainstream media. And so when there is when there is anything that is inaccurate or demeaning that is written, there is a huge response. And I think that's really healthy going forward. That no longer can the media speak to the people in a patronizing way, or speak at the people, or just tell people stories. And now people want to tell their stories as well. And I think it's a really important improvement, I think, in journalism, and kind of looking at taking a critical look at how we operate